Great, thanks so much. So I've been working on this film for about the past year with some folks named Abel and Tao, and over in Cottage Grove, Oregon, they have been working as land stewards on a property called Aprovecho that's been a community for quite a number of years, doing ecological land stewardship as well as some other ventures based out of that land. And it's changed throughout the years. But one of the main things that's been going on is a large-scale forestry project as well as a watershed management project. And that watershed has been really impacted, as many watersheds throughout the world have been very impacted due to climate change and poor land management of surrounding lands. And so Abel decided to apply for a grant through PINA, which would allow them to continue furthering the work of their watershed management plan, primarily for digging a large-scale pond near the top of their property. And so this video documents that process and also explains why the watershed has been so impacted and some of the solutions that they're implementing and possible other solutions for looking into the future. So I'll be showing that video now. This is the first time it's been shown publicly, so it's very exciting for me, having worked on it over the past year, and for PINA, who's been very supportive throughout the process. And after the video, we'll have some time to do some question and answers and possibly discuss some broader scale topics from the management, like watershed management in general, through a more media lens of what is the role of media in permaculture? How does that allow us to serve the land stewardship work that we're doing as well? So I'm going to switch over to that video now. Thanks for joining, and I hope that you enjoy the video.
When I was 8 years old, I experienced my first major ecological catastrophe. The spot that I hung out in as a kid with my friends was graded down to dirt, terraced, and paved over to be turned into a housing development by excavators. The whole landscape had completely changed, and I went home in a fit of rage. I tore the poster that was on my wall. It was SimCity. There was this poster that showed this Nintendo game where you build cities. I ripped it off of the wall, and I left up the poster of Rampage, which was this game where you play the role of Godzilla or King Kong and you destroy cities. I left it up, and I vowed as an 8-year-old to fight development. Yet here I am sitting in one of those machines. And I think it's because I believe that right now we have to leverage all the energy and resources we can towards the regeneration of the planet and the restoration of landscapes. In our area, rainfall has decreased by about 50% in recent years, and at the same time, rainfall intensity has increased by about 200%.
One of the effects of decreased rainfall and increased storm intensity is that when the rain does fall, it doesn't necessarily penetrate into the heavy clay soils that are prevalent in this area, and it can actually sheet across the land and run off without actually percolating deep into the soil and nurturing the roots of the trees.
These climate-driven factors overlap with land use practices that by design or consequence have led to the rapid movement of water out of watersheds. So this includes modern plantation forestry, roads, diversions. It includes historic practices like the trapping of the beaver, water diversions for mining, and log drives. All of these practices have compounded on each other to lead to a situation where water is extremely in deficit in the landscape. When I arrived in this valley 15 years ago, the creek would be dry by about mid-July. Old-timers remember the creek flowing year-round. And over the last couple years, after most of the upland forest in this basin was logged, the creek is dry by about the 1st of June. We're seeing the trees die, we're seeing the creeks dry, and we're watching climate change occur in real time.
Upstream of this land is pretty much private timberland, and that land is managed as a clear-cut based monoculture Douglas fir plantation. And that's the style of forest management practices that are mostly found throughout western Oregon and elsewhere. And there's actually research coming out of various universities in Oregon and elsewhere that's showing a direct correlation between reduced stream flows and clear-cut based forestry practices. That style of forestry is based on coming in and cutting the harvestable timber and leaving an exposed landscape, which is hotter and drier than surrounding shaded forest areas. Another factor that recent research has found is that those rapidly growing trees after a certain time period actually increase the amount of evapotranspiration. That's the water that the trees are taking up out of the soil and releasing into the atmosphere. As they're between 20 and 40 years old, that evapotranspiration rate really increases rapidly compared to older trees. So when we have this plantation style forestry where the trees are actually harvested around 40 years of age, we're seeing that there's actually more water leaving the landscape during that active growth period of those trees than if those trees were left to grow longer and older. So that's one of the factors that we feel like is contributing to reduced stream flows in our area, and one of the reasons that we felt really strongly about placing this pond and other earthworks here on the property, with the hope being that eventually we could help augment those stream flows and keep water around in the landscape longer.
Earthworks are one way that we can reverse this loss of water from watersheds. Through soil's capacity to wick and hold immense amounts of water, as well as ponds' ability to retain that water longer and pressurize the water so that it sinks into deeper soil layers, we get a widening of the lens of water in the soil and an increased ability for that water to do beneficial work in the landscape. The lens created by a pond increases plant growth, and through that increases carbon capture. Increased water availability leads to more water for wildlife. It leads to springs re-emerging, and ultimately at the landscape scale builds on itself to increase the base flow of streams and can return them to year-round flow. This pond was done as an education project in order to empower people to understand how, when, and why to build these ponds. First, we'll remove all the topsoil, all the organic soil, set it aside, and we'll get down to the subsoil. Everybody really has the ability to do this. One can place logs and branches as check dams by hand, and that type of work can restore the floodplain, reconnect the waterways to the historic floodplain channels, and return a creek to year-round flow without even bringing in a big machine. Siting a pond is certainly one of the most important aspects of a pond project. What you're wanting to look for is the location of the pond in relationship to what it's irrigating, what it's supplying. You're wanting to locate it as high as possible in the landscape while also situating it so that it can catch as much water as possible from upland sources.
I think you need to go up, like...
Because you're under the bubble.
You're almost placing the pond at the highest low point. Technically speaking, that's considered the key point. The key point is a place where the land goes from being steep to flat. When you look at it from a topographic map, what you see is that all of the water flows perpendicular to contour and concentrates in this point. So we've identified the key point. We've also found through digging test pits that the soil is adequate for holding water. We dug a pit in August and that pit filled up with water in 3 days. That was a very dry time of year here in Oregon. But also digging as deep as we could go with a bucket and then cutting out a slope that was safe so that nothing could get stuck in it. We saw that the soil type was adequate for building a pond. Ideally, what you have is a porous surface layer that transitions into a highly impermeable subsurface layer that can create a permanent seal on your water, and the water will percolate in and run on that. What this reveals is really, just an ideal situation. This would be the A horizon of the soil, and this is a dark, silty clay loam. It's going to have a little bit more sand and organic material in it. And then below that, it kind of transitions into this lighter, silty clay loam to almost pure clay. This is like ceramic. And then this horizon transitions into this more kind of like rocky clay, which is essentially a mix of clay and fractured bedrock. And then it gets to pure bedrock. And I'm standing, you can see that there's a little bit of flow, and that's running right on the surface of the bedrock here. So what we're primarily going to want to work with is this clay material. And this is going to form the interior core of our dam. And it's also going to be used to create a seal along the dam and the bottom of the pond, so that as water emanates in from upslope and out of porous layers, it'll encounter this and just have a complete seal. So the next step was preparing the site. We surveyed where the ultimate water level would be, where we suspected the dam height would be, and what the width of the pond would be. Should really invent a laser level that, instead of beeping like that, makes bird calls or something. And also we surveyed the plants that were existing within the footprint of the pond, so making sure that we weren't going to be impacting any rare or threatened species. There's this nice monkey flower in here that I'd really like to dig up. We cleared the shrubs and the brush. The next step was deciding which trees specifically we were going to take out.
So it's definitely got beetle pressure in it.
You can see in the cambium how much they've
Yeah,
to it.
it's totally starting to girdle it already. But this is probably an 80-year-old tree. If it's under attack already,
Leaning into the pond side.
leaning into the pond, in 25 years, you don't want anything that's going to threaten the dam wall that could breach it or something like that.
That top is really leaning out, isn't it? It must just have a couple of branches hung up.
Yeah, we don't want to leave that very long. All right, we're still up there. Easy peasy. Yeah.
We staged them for on-site milling and processing. And the next step after that was to clear the topsoil. So this topsoil is special, and at the end of the project, we drive back across the dam and we scoop the topsoil back up and spread it over the top of the dam. And what that does then is it creates a good substrate for new grass and other herbaceous vegetation to establish on top of the dam. We spread it around the back side of the pond as well. The next step is to trench out the area where the key goes. So the key is a cut trench in the middle of the location of the dam. You dig that out down below the excavation pit level, and we began to construct our dam by placing a wall of extremely high clay content soil into the center of the dam. We build that key up until we get above the elevation of water level. Here we have the benefit of having a lot of clay content, and it's said that if you have more than 40% clay, you can build an earthen dam that holds and also retains water. And I built this up until I was above the ultimate water height by about 3 feet. The dam over time will settle a bit. I'm anticipating that probably the dam will come down to about 2 feet above the water height. At about every foot of added soil to the dam, we track rolled the dam with the excavator a number of times in order to compact it as well as possible. This dam was built so that it was wide enough to be able to accommodate vehicle traffic over it from the Keyline Road, but all dams don't necessarily have to be this wide. What I did then is I cut a spillway through one side that would set the ultimate water height below the ultimate height of the dam. The spillway is built to be able to handle 3 times at least the maximum anticipated water flow coming through the channel. And into the side of the dam near the spillway, we placed a trickle tube. It is set just below the height of the spillway. And it takes the subtle flow during the non-rainy season and diverts it to a pipe which runs out and around the side of the dam so that the earthen spillway doesn't take a small flow of water year-round, because that flow can slowly cut away at the spillway. It might seem a little technical, but it's not very glamorous. You really just scoop in place and scoop in place for days until it's done. A lot of dirt.
Once the pond was complete, it took about 4 or 5 months to fill completely, and we were coming up here every few days to check on its progress as it moved inch by inch with every passing rainstorm. Over the years, we've dug a series of ponds and other earthworks on the property, which have served to help harvest and maintain the water on the site throughout the year. This pond here is kind of the capstone of that earthworks project, and it serves to feed into all of the ponds lower on the property.
When we began, this particular valley would have very little water moving through it. Watching these ponds, I'm seeing that they are rehydrating the landscape. I'm seeing the water flowing overland longer into the dry season. When I'm walking in the woods, I'm seeing that the vegetation is green downhill of the ponds, and we're not needing to irrigate our orchards and our forest gardens. So this type of water harvesting earthwork is one that does retain water but slowly releases it through the soil to the surrounding environment. And so we have both a balance of meeting human needs and providing benefit to the ecology. Too often the focus in pond development and pond permitting is this idea in regards to human use that it's a degenerative force, and too often it is. But there's a right way to do something that can lead to beneficial socio-economic outcomes at the same time are assistive and regenerative to the environment and also us who are part of it. It's my hope in demonstrating this work that we can further the idea that developing these ponds is something that should be encouraged and promoted by local divisions of government and regulatory agencies.
One of the reasons we are really excited about this pond is that we feel like it's a really good example for local landowners and land stewards to potentially replicate on their sites as a means to enhance biodiversity and overall watershed health.
I think about what this could look like at the watershed scale. This is a 40-acre property in the midst of a 400-acre watershed basin. We could do this work On every tributary within this basin, there's at least 10. So we could have easily 100 of these ponds scattered throughout this basin, contributing water to the stream channel. You could only imagine what this would do for wildlife and for the biological potential of the forests in this watershed. Particularly if you coupled this with other practices like placing check dams in the incised channels to return the flow to its easily 100-foot wide floodplain, or if you were to increase the width and the diversity of the streamside forests, not to mention returning forests to mixed species, mixed age stands, I'm sure that we could see a return of the creek to year-round flow. This is just a tributary creek of a sub-watershed of the Willamette Valley. You can really imagine how all of these minor tributaries contributing to the Willamette Valley itself, this work can rapidly restore the hydrology of watersheds.
Thank you, Mitchell. That was beautiful.
Thanks so much, and thanks to everyone for watching that. It's really exciting to be able to share it in this format and get the word out about this project and hopefully empower people to do this sort of work themselves or feel inspired to learn more and share information about it. Thanks for watching.
Thank you. I've also brought Peter Bain on so that you can kind of go over the history of how this entire project was born.
Oh, fantastic. And is Abel in the chat? I'm not sure if he was able to join us today.
We are still working on getting him connected.
Awesome, thanks.
Well, let me say, Mitchell, that even though I've seen this before, it's even more impressive the second time around. It's a really beautiful film. It will do an enormous amount to advance PINA's goals and on the kind of work we want to do in the world. And it shows a tremendous amount of talent on your part. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks so much, Peter. I really appreciate that. And yeah, the project was inspiring to me from the beginning, just learning that PINA as an organization was interested in funding this sort of thing, both the actual work happening on the ground as well as the media to supplement that. And I am also a practicing permaculturist. I'm a land steward on a community property just about half an hour away from Cottage Grove here in Oregon. And probably like many of you watching, I find it incredibly hard to be at the computer and incredibly strange to be using contemporary technologies like cameras. That's not in many ways where my heart is at. My heart is in doing the land stewardship work. But at the same time, I recognize that media and being able to tell these stories in a contemporary way is a powerful thing at this time. And so I really want to honor PINA for recognizing that and being able to support not only the actual land stewardship projects, but also the documentation. And this video, I know there are many different intentions and purposes for this video. For one, just sharing information about viable alternatives with the general public. As well, Abel, who we saw throughout the film, is really involved. He's a member of the local watershed council. He is regularly working with government agencies around pond permitting and things like that, digging ponds at other properties. And this is kind of his passion project, the work at Aprovecho. So he's hoping to be able to use this video to actually try to convince local regulatory agencies to approve an entirely new pond permit. Like was mentioned in the video, when people are often going to get a pond permit or a water right permit, which maybe some of the people in this chat today have gone through on their own land, it's incredibly hard. And that's because so much of the water usage that's happening is, detrimental, or at least, taking from the watershed for agricultural irrigation, for industry, things like that. And what Abel is trying to show through this work is very much that this is actually about enhancing the environment. This is actually about,
Yes.
Allowing the water that's already coming to slow down, percolate into the soil, and help heal the forests and restore our watersheds. And why this sort of a permit doesn't exist, I think, one, just shows what the state of affairs are in the country around water usage and restoration. And a lot of restoration folks, some of you all may be, I think in the permaculture scene, it may not be controversial to say this, but I think a lot of the restoration folks can be kind of narrowed in on how should I put it? Well, I think where we differ, some of the permaculturists versus just straight up restoration, is our sense of the role of human involvement. And so this type of pond is not a naturally occurring phenomena exactly the way that Abel's building it. It's different, but it also recognizes that the landscape has been incredibly changed from what it once was. And we saw Abel reference, the beavers used to do this.
Exactly.
But they're not around anymore. And so how do we step in to facilitate that process as land stewards? So I think that this video has tremendous impact just in the ability to communicate to people who are in a position to approve these types of permits, so that land stewards like us can just go out and do this, that we don't have to jump through regulatory hoops that, in many places, they're not even issuing water permits. There's none left. You can't get them.
Right.
So a lot of people are doing this illegally or under the table, and that really prevents us from documenting and sharing and promoting. So,
or for advancing very fast at all. We really need this to be done. And the problem is acute across the West, where water rights are controlled by the state authorities. We don't have quite the same burden in humid climates here in the East, but half the country, more than half the country, is experiencing these kinds of regimes that are very rigid and very trapped in 19th century thinking.
Absolutely.
There's nothing more powerful than the kind of document you've created here to show in detail not only what's being done, but why, and therefore to change minds and open up the path that you point to for others to do more such work. We need many, many more such projects, from Oregon to Colorado and Washington to New Mexico. So I hope this, makes a contribution. I think it's worth sharing with our audience today that there's a little, I'm proud of it as a member of the PINA staff and former board member, that we came to the conclusion that an important step in outreach would be to offer a design contest. We did this in the fall of 2018 at a board retreat. And Andrew Millison, who had a hand in this film and is a board member, made the suggestion that we should run a design contest. The board liked it. We did it. We got a lot of new members. We got 42 entries. And this one by Dow Orion was voted by the membership the most promising, and it was awarded the $5,000 prize, which is why this got built. We put the money there, and of course, Dow and Abel and their amazing crew of helpers worked as volunteers, or mostly so. So they weren't paid much, but the money paid for the bulldozer and the equipment and the supplies and the whatnot. And then we had this thing that came about, and it was like, oh, we have to tell this story. And thankfully, Andrew mentioned your name. We saw your portfolio, and it's like, oh yeah, this guy. He's got the right stuff. And to hear your story, that you are trained in permaculture, so you have the eye as well as the lens and the mind to display these things. It's just a great fortuitous coming together of circumstances. And we're honored and pleased to be able to work with you and hope that there'll be other opportunities. We're not done, we're just getting started.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that, Peter. I appreciate hearing that. And throughout this project, Abel and I discussed using this kind of as a template and an example to continue doing this sort of work. In college, I actually did an undergraduate thesis on television propaganda. And, sometimes I used to watch a lot of TV as a kid. I didn't grow up in the scenes that I'm in now. And, while filming this, I was kind of thinking, there's literally hundreds of TV channels. What an amazing resource, really, to be able to communicate in the ways that we can now in the contemporary world. What if just slightly more funding was put towards these sort of documents? This video easily could have been a 3-hour-long DVD going into fine detail about how to construct a pond and what to look for in different climates, different soil types, things like that. When doing that test pit section of the video, it's really interesting to be able to show people this is literally what it's going to look like when you dig into your soil in the Pacific Northwest. Here's what to look for. Here's what to do depending on the soil types. So yeah, we're absolutely hoping that this can gain traction and that it can continue to garner support for us to be able to put out even more in-depth information to empower people to do themselves. And like we heard Abel talk about, a lot of this work, you don't even need a big machine. And in some ways, the video is sensational because of that, because we did get the opportunity, thanks to PINA's funding, to use a big machine. But a lot of this sort of work can be done by hand, and we'd love to be able to make documents like that so that we can show folks who have all different sorts of spectrums of available resources how you can do this sort of work. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the opportunity to getting to expound upon where this has just planted a seed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm starting to get a few questions come in from the chat.
Absolutely.
Clarifying it. And I understand Abel is going to join us soon, or
great.
soon.
Let's see. So feel free to post your questions in the chat. I appreciate the kind words that are in there so far. So someone said here, wish I had that much water to harvest.
Greg's in Phoenix, okay?
Yes, definitely. And the climate out there is much different. And, it's interesting to think, if you're in Phoenix, part of the important part about digging ponds or swales or things like that is very much so that when the rains do come, we're able to capture them and store them longer in the watershed. And there's all sorts of things that can be done just to slow down the water a bit. And at Aprovecho, they're on quite a slope, so a pond is what made sense. But in other places, even small amounts of improvements, even with a shovel, can do a lot of directing water and slowing water down through contour measurements and things like that. So definitely encourage folks to observe how the water is flowing on their land and start making small changes to see how that impacts the water flow on their land. And another thing that I realized, I grew up in California, and part of my decision to relocate to Oregon was going where the water was, just tracking long-term climate trends. And I thought, oh great, I'm going to where there's water. Well, what I learned is that Oregon, especially where we live here, is in some ways a bit of an extreme climate. We get a lot of rain very quickly, and as Abel said, it's coming even harder now, even though it's diminishing. And
then you have a long dry season, don't you?
Yes, we have a very long extreme dry season, so it's important that we actually slow that water down and stop it in something like a pond so that it can naturally drain throughout the rest of the year into the soil.
So Ian had a question in the question and answer as far as, is there an estimate to the total cost of this pond at its size? I've also pulled Ian up onto the panelist circle so you can direct any follow-up.
I mean, Abel might be better able to answer that than we are. I wasn't intimately involved in the side conversations. PINA provided $5,000 to Dow representing money that came in, you know, some of it from members. Members chose the project by voting, but I am sure there were ancillary things went on all around the process. There was an application to the state of Oregon for a water right, which was granted, almost unheard of, as Mitchell points out. Hardly any of those get granted anymore. There were volunteers, it seems. There was a workshop held. There's Abel. Dow is flashed on the screen. Maybe Abel, you can say more about what was the total cost. You know, was there more beyond PINA's $5,000 and the labor we've pointed at?
Yeah, hi, sorry I'm late. Had some Zoom complications, but yeah, as far as the total cost goes, it came out to just about 5,000. There was a bit of volunteerism there, but if you also consider that, you know, we rented the machine for a month and did some other work in the neighborhood, which that brought down the rental price quite a bit. So it really it was probably about a $5,000 project, including you know, pay and some and also some plumbing components and seed and straw and some follow-up work with some check dams and things like that to ameliorate some erosion. So yeah, it came out to about that, which is certainly you know, on the gallon is a lot cheaper than,
it's phenomenal. I mean, what's the volume of the pond? You got an estimate of that? Area?
You know, I think it's probably about like 150, maybe 100 to 150,000.
Yeah. It's, like really, really highly leveraged, I'd say.
Yeah.
I think we can't do more of that. We could just transform the landscape everywhere.
Definitely. Yeah.
And I just want to underline Abel saying that there was some volunteerism, which is giving some gratitude towards Abel and Dow for just the immense amount of work that they put into this as a passion project. And Abel is coming with years of experience using machines and things like that. So I know that most of us probably in this chat are used to working from our hearts and not for a paycheck in this sort of work. But also it is interesting that these sorts of things can pay off in the long run. What an asset to have on a property. And these are the sorts of institutions, these projects that last for generations. And we see, you know, the ability to rent a machine right now, I think is well worth it in terms of the cost, both environmentally of burning the diesel, but also the economic cost. But, you know, some of you may have seen Andrew Millicent's presentation. I didn't get to watch it, but I talk with him regularly about his filming work and what he's documenting. People doing projects even larger than this by hand with shovels as community. And so I think we're very grateful to be able to use our dollars to rent machines, but understanding this sort of thing conceptually seems the direction that we're headed as a world. You know, we may be picking up shovels soon, and we may have crews of people being willing to do it. So these sort of projects can be done for just about nothing. If you can just pay for food for people, and you have a crew. And I know maybe Abel could speak to some of the smaller ponds that are on Aprovecho's land were dug by hand. At least one, is that right?
Yeah, we dug our primary key point pond by hand, just because it's pretty steep gradient landscape. So when you get up into the high elevations of the drainages, it really makes sense to do it by hand. And I think, you know, there's a lot to that, to really focusing on where are the leverage points. You know, there's this kind of the saying, like, the best place to store water is in the soil itself, and then storing it in plants and living vegetation, and then kind of this hierarchy to larger earthworks, and then water tanks, looking at those places where you can store water on the landscape. In our particular area, we're in a headwaters drainage, as it was kind of explained in the video. some of the most extensive water harvesting outcomes that we've seen on our land are just really well thought out and carefully placed brush check dams, you know, in the right location. The sediment builds up behind those check dams, and it spreads all the way across an entire 150, 200 foot floodplain, you know, and then sinks in across that entire bottomland forest, and retains water and the moisture in the brush all year long. So
used for that material too.
Yeah.
For burning.
Yeah.
So the point that Mitchell was making earlier bears punctuating. This is perhaps one of the most important kinds of investments we can make in this time in history. As we go forward, we have the opportunity to use big machinery for a while. We can do it now. We may not be able to do it in 50 years, but the pond will be there in 50 years, continuing to work. So it's really the appropriate use of fossil fuels and steel and the high embedded energy technologies of our current culture.
Anita had a question. I wanted to invite her on to ask that question.
Okay. So I don't see myself. Do I get to see myself, or?
You need to turn your camera on from your end, I believe.
Got it. All right, there it is. Okay, good. So I live in Southwest Virginia in the Appalachian Mountains. And, you know, the question that I asked was, you know, pretty much order of ponds. I was looking at that map. And so this one seemed to be the one that's below the key on the key line. And then there were a bunch lower down. I don't know from my memory of your film, you know, whether those other ones had been built already. Was this one done first? Are they still waiting to be built? Were they done first? And, you know, I just want to, it's not something I'm going to do myself, but if I'm talking to people in this area, you know, we actually have a lot of forested land on steep, you know, mountainsides. And we're predicted to have at least a 10-degree temperature, average temperature rise in the next not very many years at all. So I expect the rain patterns to be changing, and what you're doing there actually would be very relevant in the not very distant future. So if you could just help fill that in.
Yeah, so to the question of the order of the ponds, that so I watched the video, but I didn't get to I didn't just catch it, so I can't actually quite remember. Mitchell, you might be able to say whether or not the map showed the current or the future layout.
In the map that I included in the video is the current layout, but I have seen the future design layout as well. So
yeah, so all the ponds you saw there are existing, and
were they built top to bottom?
You know, they to be honest, they weren't. We kind of have tackled them more along the logic of what we have the budget for and what type of machine we have available and other things like that. But from a just purely kind of procedural standpoint, I would say the best thing to do is to start from the top and really work down, but also, you know, take it in stages, kind of observe and you know, adapt, monitor, and the biggest benefit to starting high and working down with your earthworks is that you're able to, you know, that when you concentrate flow, you get different outcomes, and you also build up water storage in the ground, so you get different kind of hydrologic behavior moving down slope. So that's why I would suggest starting from the top and taking it ideally also taking it year to year.
Right. I have one other question. I actually have a relationship with the senior professor for environmental sciences and so on at a local college here. and he also sponsors the Climate Collective, the Student Climate Collective. So, you know, in talking to them about something like this, is there a connection that I can explain that they can look at in terms of climate terms?
Yeah, you know, so there's, I think about it at a lot of, at a number of scales, you know, at the local and the microclimate scale, what you get when you harvest water, when you store it on the land and you run it into the earth and you store it in living plants, is you get enhanced microclimate effects and you get more vegetation. So when you have more vegetation, that creates a positive feedback loop for more moisture and more shade and microclimate in the environment. And so you know, there's nothing like having year-round water, especially in these like in the Mediterranean arid climate. That year-round water can make the difference between an open, parched landscape and you know, a year-round green kind of riparian type habitat. But then at the more like regional scale, this type of work, essentially just slowing down and retaining water in the landscape, it works to rehydrate the local atmosphere through vegetation's ability to release and cycle water and cool the climate. And if we restore, a lot of what's happened is the water cycles of the earth have been you know, severed in places so that the water is less present within regions. And when we take that water and we run it back into the ground and circulate it, we're creating a situation where there's more buffering effects in the atmosphere from the role the water plays to buffer temperature extremes.
The companion to this, Anita, is the climate talk that led off the Climate Water Plenary. And while it's not as visually elegant as Mitchell's film, which is a beautiful work of art, really, the logic is, I think, very clear there. We get green growth, we get more transpiration, and particularly when we support forests, which are tall, and release their cloud-forming bacteria high in the atmosphere, we get a whole cascade of effects that cool on at least 4 processes. They shade, cooling the land surface, less radiated heat into the atmosphere. They release cloud-forming bacteria that cause nucleation of rain. They form high albedo clouds. And that heat, they move by transpiration, heat goes up to the atmosphere, and much of it can go up to the stratosphere because they're already tall, and it rises far, and there the radiant heat is let out to space safely without being stuck in the lower atmosphere.
So the trees are not as tall here as they are in Oregon.
I understand, but it still works in much the same way.
And there's also there's another thing which I'm not completely, you know, I haven't quite grasped this, but you know, when you don't have water, if you think about the complete water cycle, water moving through its cycle from evaporation, moving through the atmosphere, concentrating, falling as rain, moving through plants, moving to soil, groundwater, coming back out to streams. The full water cycle really is its interaction with all of the elements as it moves through that network. And without the plants and without soil organic matter, without the duff, without any of these interacting factors, what you have is water just moving quickly into the atmosphere, and now we have a high amount of water that's stored in the atmosphere that's not going into living systems, and then water and water bodies, right? And so then you think about all of
straight line storms.
the heat
highly
energy
destructive.
that's just stored in that water, and it's it then create this more storms, more friction, more and so by actually retaining that water in living systems, what we do is we turn that energy that's stored in that water into like other functional life yields, rather than just stored energy in the atmosphere itself.
If we have damp
And so
soil,
that water that's stuck in the atmosphere is actually a driver of climate change.
yes.
So the other thing here, the fires are already going on the West Coast already. We started having fires within the last 3 years or so. And so I look at Clinch Mountain, and I had a young man who said, it's on the other side, and I wait for the fire to show up there. And so this is actually a present concern in this area as it dries out. So this is part of restoring that situation too, because the water is being held not just in undergrowth, but in the soil itself and in the cycle.
The soil is a reservoir not only of water, but of carbon, which helps hold it. So you can't grow the carbon. The trees can't grow it. They can't do root growth and die off, which builds it, unless there's moisture to drive that cycle.
Right.
So they go hand in hand. So to pull it out of the atmosphere, we need the trees to grow, and we need them to make the soil. Yeah. And then that holds the water that enables the whole thing. So it's one cycle, and we're getting in there and we're leaning into it in a big way with this kind of work.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And mentioning fires as well, that's another stacked function of a pond, is having a very large reservoir of water on your land. And if there is a fire spreading in a drought season, where are the helicopters going to go for water? And so that's if you have a defensible space, as they call it, with a large body of water, your property may not burn when all the surrounding properties do, because the fire crews are going to be epicentered at your land. So that's a huge benefit and investment in making a large-scale investment in an area where wildfires could spread. Additionally, that sort of information could be helping spread the proliferation of approval of permits for these sorts of ponds, because I'm not super hip to agricultural ponds and their usage, but I imagine by peak season, those agricultural ponds are being drained, whereas the pond at Aprovecho is full right now in peak fire season, or just under full. So that's an advantage that no other pond usages are really providing. So yeah, it's a stacked function there of these ponds.
Good point. Wow.
And are there any other questions?
You said you worked on this for a year.
Just about.
Yeah.
And that was just, allowing the pond to fill up, getting to see the way the vegetation interacted. And I know that the actual construction of the pond was done in about 3 weeks or something like that, Abel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, but you need a length of time to see the effects and show them.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm very grateful that you had the patience and that, you didn't let us pressure you unduly. Where's that film? Where's that film?
Yeah, I want to say Mitchell just did such an amazing job. It was so fun to work with you, Mitchell, and I think you did just an incredible job. And I also want to thank you, Peter, and the rest of the PINA team for investing that energy and having and actually capturing the project on video. So
we're going to take it to the bank many times, Abel. Don't you worry.
Yeah,
that's part of why all this PR. It's the right thing to do. It's a good story too.
Thank you all very much for that. And we will be publishing the video probably within the coming week or two, and beginning to share it and spread it out. So for all those who are in this chat and are feeling inspired by it, it would be very helpful for you all to share it with your networks. We can look to the PINA social media pages for the publication of that. I think the more eyes we get on this sort of a thing, the more opportunity it's going to open up for funding for more of these sorts of projects, and funding for more documentation projects as well. And you can also follow along on my Facebook page, Stories of Regeneration, which was just launched recently. The link is in my my little presenter bio. for more information on this and future projects as well.
Great.
Yeah, and the plan is for free distribution. It will be probably going on YouTube. And we do have a lot more footage. And as you're hearing, Abel speak, there's just a wealth of information and ideas. And I know that at the land where this pond was dug, there are more forestry projects and things like that. So we're looking forward to creating more content. And if the funding can be there somehow, I would love to, like I mentioned, be making content that's very, very detailed, making these sort of inspirational videos that are, giving like kind of a hands-on approach and an introduction to these sorts of subjects, but also like very detailed how-to videos for these sorts of things. And I know the forestry work that's happening out there, that's really critical information because we just live in such a homogenized world of forestry management in this bioregion, and there really is not very much information about alternatives. So yeah, looking forward to creating some videos on that too and putting that out for free.
I would point out that Alan Booker in the chat and Ian Graham in the chat have made two very useful suggestions that speak to that more detailed level. And one is a caveat about Abel was not in danger of a cave-in when he was down in that slot because of clay. But in other situations, you would not be there without protection.
For sure.
That's something that OSHA wants to be sure is carefully done. We're not worried about you. You were not at risk and you're a sensible person, but someone looking at it might need to hear that. And Ian wanted to say, could we have a detailing of the other elements that all went into this, like pipes and hours of, chainsaw work and whatever other way that it might be detailed out.
Yeah, that sounds like good supplementary information, maybe to be included in the text accompanying a YouTube video.
Yeah, exactly. Jane.
Yeah, I was thinking about that a lot. It was just what would be the supplementary pieces. Maybe at the end you have your website, and then there's people should know some of the details. But the other piece that comes up for me, which I dropped in the chat too, is that there's clearly business opportunities here, whether they're for you or for others around. And so breaking out the things like how much volunteer work did you really do? And then if you were actually paid a living wage to do that volunteer work, what would that really cost? Or to hire somebody in your place, what would it cost? You know what I mean? And then, and maybe it's actually a $15,000 project and not a $5,000, whatever it is. But the reason I say that is because then that can turn it into a living wage for somebody, whether it's you or other people. And I feel like we really, as permaculture folks, tend to give our work away, especially because we're pioneering and figuring all this shit out, right? But really, we need to be making livelihoods for each other. So I just wanted to say that.
So Jillian is asking to speak. I'm not sure. I don't see you on my screen, Jillian, but if you unmute, maybe you can be heard.
She maybe needs to be made a...
I'm promoting her to panelist now. She's coming up.
Sorry, I think that just kind of bumped me out and put me back in a different level. But
you're here now.
Okay. Hey, Abel.
Hi. Hi, Julian.
All right. Fantastic work. And I think it proves the point of just, you have professional level imagery, just the leverage that it has. And I think there's so much good work in the permaculture community. So thanks, Peter, for the leadership around this. And I was lucky enough to be there on the day you guys were breaking ground when I was invited down for a visit after the Northwest Permaculture Convergence. And I brought 3 young men with me. And, I talked to them afterwards and said, pay attention to what's going on. And Ryder, who was there, I kind of had a follow-up call and said, get thy ass over there and, connect. So just want to lift up the whole intergenerational connection, like learning and apprenticeship around this. And especially, this is a real appropriate yang exercise. And I think it's really important to have a lot of folks around apprenticing so we can really build this up, you know, like same as building the water in the groundwater table, you know, we got to build that capacity. And I think funders could get behind something like this. So again, Mitchell, I'm just making your acquaintance. I've liked your Facebook page and would like to know, I have more technical questions, like what kind of camera to use, what kind of editing suite were you in, you know, all that kind of stuff, but we can take that offline. So I'll follow up with a message. So thanks, great job, you guys. And Abel, are you, you know, I just don't want to have this be a drawdown on your time and other resources, but like a mentorship apprenticeship program and a little bit of structure around that. What would you think?
I'd be totally into it. I really love I love working with other people, and you know, you mentioned Ryder. Ryder's been at Aprovecho since really since that day, and he's been wonderful to have on the land. He helped us make a pitch to the NRCS to include a biochar cost share program here in the county, and we had them come out and take a look at our forest just a month ago, and they approved a really pretty significant cost share program to turn all of our slash from our upcoming thinning project into biochar. So it's just an example of, you know, the great overlaps, you know, and the multi-directional learning that gets to happen when you work with others. Yeah, I'd be all for it. Just a matter of kind of fleshing out the details, obviously, and you know, I know that PINA has sort of a model whereby people that are moving through the process of certification get to work with field directors and others working on the ground, and I think that's a really important thing, because certainly there's a big need, I think, in the permaculture community to kind of provide pathways towards you know, all being able to understand and work with all these complex details of the different types of, you know, approaches that
our diploma specialization in site development and implementation would be the cover for this. Someone who wanted to know how in the world to catch water and build ponds and do forestry work and so on could study it and receive credentialing for that.
Yeah, and what a sweet opportunity, mentioning Ryder as well as the mentorship. I remember one day that Ryder's a friend of mine as well. I remember one day I came out to film with Abel, and the conditions were just not quite right. The lighting wasn't right, and we just decided, hey, let's not do the filming today, let's delay it. And so after driving a half hour out there, we walked out to the parking lot, and Abel and I just sat down talking about philosophy for 3 hours. And then Ryder came up, and Ryder and I talked for an hour about philosophy and where we're at with our permaculture work and things like that. So these sorts of actually, Abel, that conversation with you was really inspiring, and talking about, you know, some of the complexities of community living and managing our professional work with our philosophical ideals and things like that. And so I think those sorts of things are things that I want to be putting out and centering more as well. Like, what are the philosophical ideas behind these projects, and what are some of the contemporary issues in regards to other things that were not addressed in this film, like justice-oriented work and things like that. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of directions that can this can be a seed for, and not just the like dudes with chainsaws and big machines sort of thing.
I'd like to acknowledge Anita. She's had her hand up for a bit here.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of add on. The area that I'm in is I'm in a low-income neighborhood myself, but it's a relatively low-income area. So when people start talking about volunteers, I go, oh, adults who have other income. And then younger people, it's a real issue here. It became an issue right where I'm living. You know, I had somebody who was partnering around helping develop this, and he teaches. He has a permaculture. He has a PDC, and he has the program for horticulture locally in the local community college. But when they came up of having internships, kids need to be paid. The students needed to be paid in this kind of area. So I really want to bring that issue about incomes in various areas into place. This is a place where there used to be industries that have all left. And, you know, a lot of younger people have just fled, but there are other ones who would like to be able to stay here, but it needs to be integrated in some kind of compensation that works.
Thank you.
I think we all have a really big opportunity to step up with the kind of vision, you know, behind like a Green New Deal or some sort of initiative that would require leaders and teachers in land regeneration, and then being able to put people into meaningful work. And also I definitely, a big thing for me is I agree very much with you, Anita, that it's important to provide an equitable kind of compensation for people's work. And that would be one of the big, you know, things I'd want to be working out, you know, as we look at an apprenticeship arrangement. And in the past, involved with Aprovecho, there was a moment at the beginning of the Obama administration when they invested in, or they created the Workforce Investment Act, and it was kind of a green jobs. Well, it wasn't green really, but it had elements of, you know, renewable energy and other types of
retrofits, other things.
Retrofits. But they did provide a lot of money through the school districts to train youth and to do new job training. And for a very brief period, there was this wonderful project where students got paid. They got $12 an hour, and they also got community college credits to work with us on installing ferrocement tank, aquaculture greenhouse, you know, a solar hot water installation, and also all the finished carpentry in a building. And those students, one of them went on to a wind power degree up in the gorge. One of them even went all the way to Washington, D.C. to pitch for the continued funding. Congress canceled the funds on that workforce investment program. But this is the type of thing that I think in kind of the political realm, us in permaculture can be working on. You know, is we have a platform for putting people for helping people move into really meaningful and yeah, just meaningful work. You know. And there's a huge need for that.
Well,
Michael, you had a comment? You'll need to unmute yourself.
I just had a question asked to that. I am understanding the progression of this is to be more action oriented as we move forward. Is there a design charrette that's going to happen later today, is my understanding, where this is going to be specifically addressed, like the problem of, we've talked about this before. I know, Peter, you mentioned it at the Colorado Convergence, and that is really studying the ethos of permaculture and applying it as it is designed, fair and balanced between environmental, people care, and fair share, and how traditionally we haven't done that. I think Anita, you know, brought that up about this pay thing. I really see this as the PINA's biggest opportunity to really gain traction with this movement, is to be the expertise on gathering the funding to make these projects a reality, because I'm working on a bunch of things right now that can change the world, but I have no funding to make it a reality. And a lot of young people are disinterested if they're not getting paid. I did a program 2 years ago where I worked with 13 young people on a city grant, and 2 of them ended up changing their majors in college. From one was an artist and one was a photographer, and one went into indigenous phenology and the other one went into ecology, and now they're going to be juniors, and they're really passionate, excited about learning more about this. But we have to set up the framework where it can be a viable income, because I'm really not interested in writing a book, teaching. You know, I have a master's degree in education. I've taught for 27 years. And so that has afforded me the opportunity to go do this stuff for free. But I have not been working and teaching for 4 years now and have tried to make a income out of this. And I am sadly disappointed that it is not, that we don't have the infrastructure to make this a reality. Even with all my expertise and education, and as a person of color, it makes no sense to me that I cannot be, that nobody stepped up and made it a reality for me to do what I love to do. And instead I have to do what the system wants me to do, which is talk to people, be in front of people, doing all this stuff. My relatives in the woods respond to the communication that I have with them, and that's the right relationship that I enjoy. And I wish I had the opportunities to make that a reality 24/7, as opposed to when I can take time away from making money doing other stuff, gigging it. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So
I hear you, Michael. And a lot of us have been in similar circumstances, have felt that. I think PINA's operative model is that if we can band together and be seen for the many things that permaculture has done as a community and showcase them and stand up and speak to pools of money and government authority and mainstream actors, then we can open channels for money to flow, and we know where it needs to go and what needs to be done with it. But the whole thing lies in the effectiveness of our solidarity and our outreach. And PINA is committed to that. So, you know, lean in and help us. And
yes, sir.
Faster.
So is that gonna, and I guess I did stray, and I'm sorry for rambling. Is that going to happen this afternoon is what my question was. Are we gonna start?
What's going to happen at 5:30 is there's a design charrette or a workshop on extending the thinking around the Million Tree Challenge, which is a whole lot of opportunities for community-based projects that'll depend on our ability to mobilize water and other resources and to coordinate and track and showcase and so on and so forth. But the summit is winding down. We'll be closing it at 9 o'clock tonight. So we hope to do another one in midwinter.
And Michael, thanks for everything that you just shared there. And I think it can be really easy to hear you sharing something like that and go quickly to, well, here's how we're doing it, here's how we're trying to get the funding, all these sorts of things. But I definitely just want to take a second to just hold some grief around what you're saying, because I think most people in this group can resonate on some level with putting our hearts into something that we know has value and that the society at large just is not honoring right now. Yep. And that we can say, you know, here's the track that we're going to try to get to, but just want to honor the folks out there who are doing this work and have been doing this work for generations, you know, not being paid properly and sometimes worse, like being harmed over it. So yeah, I just want to hold that. And something that I find in my heart that kind of gets me through some of these sorts of things, where even though we can be working down the path and see, you know, PINA just put up money for this project, that's inspiring to me. There are other avenues to be able to make this sort of work happen. I think the word sustainability gets thrown around a lot, and we know that the world as it is not sustainable. And in some way that gives me solace. Like it's just not sustainable. It's not going to continue. It can't. And so there is going to need to be alternatives. And for those of us who are laying the groundwork right now, even though many of us are not being paid adequately, I do think that it's going to lay the groundwork for future generations to have a right livelihood, to be able to meet their needs doing righteous work. So I just want to offer gratitude to you, Michael, for doing the work that you're doing, to Abel and Dow, to PINA, to Peter, to all the folks in this chat who I know are showing up to do this sort of work. So thank you for doing that, even when we don't have all the answers about how we're going to pay for it yet.
I'd also like to pull Corinne Brennan on at this point, because she was making some very valuable observations in the chat that I'd like her to speak to, as well as to comment on if any of the charrette this afternoon will be going into this that she will be leading, which is the second half of that reweaving. Corinne, are you able to unmute at this point?
Okay. Actually, Paula will be leading that session. And it is a, integrated session. Obviously, this Million Tree Project needs to be funded, and it is a job creation opportunity. We really need to pull this whole question together about funding, because so many of us have spent so many hours volunteering. I've spent more than half of my life volunteering, and it's a burnout. And I totally hear the need to pay people in already disadvantaged position. So yeah, this should be a working group. And a number of people have already come forward to me expressing a desire to pull this together, and some people with some solutions. So I think it's going to come together, and it's I will be following up on it. I hope other people will be too. And Michael, if you want to be part of that conversation, we're happy to include you to the degree you want to be involved.
Thank you.
I'm going to take this moment to step off the call and move on to other summit work. Thank you all for your contributions. Thank you, Mitchell, for your fine film, Abel and Dow for the brilliant work you helped bring together, and everyone whose interests have furthered this.
And Mitchell and Abel, do you have any final words here? I think we'd like to leave it with you two to kind of wrap up where you want to go next and what your last thoughts are here.
Sure. Yeah, I'm very excited about continuing to do this work, documenting these sorts of projects and sharing them with people. I think in the immediate, just getting this video out there, which you all could be very helpful in that process, in sharing that around to your networks. And yeah, continuing to work in the bioregion, documenting important projects. So feel free to send information over my way if you're aware of projects that are happening. And I think, yeah, it really does, in many ways, depend on funding sources to be able to put these high quality productions together. So yeah, and I know that Abel has some more visions for work at the land that the pond was dug. Maybe you could speak to that, Abel?
Yeah, that pond really, even though the video focused on the pond, I think it's clear that the pond is really part of a bigger just set of interrelated systems up there at Aprovecho. And we putting that pond in was a big step in getting a keyline access road system for fire control and forest management put in on the property. That pond dam allows us to cross a major drainage, have the water for firefighting purposes and use to pump out of as we're doing our forestry operations. And it gives us a distribution means across that valley. So the next big step with this project is one to continue the complete pond and access installation project, and then to build up some of those ponds as aquaculture ponds on the property. The other major element is we're going to be carrying out a 10-year thinning on the land, and also doing quite a bit of restoration on the oak woodland prairie habitats on the property. And so, as Mitchell and I were working on this, we were conceiving of potentially 2 more documentaries, one about just the keyline applications in the forestry kind of context, and then also a documentary on individual and group selection kind of forestry systems that work economically and socially that stand up as a alternative to the clear-cut modality of forest management here in the Pacific Northwest. And that alternative approach to forestry is something that Approvecho has been demonstrating for almost 40 years. And so I think it would be really wonderful if we could capture this next phase of our forest work on video with Mitchel's help. That'd be really wonderful. So yeah, just holding out that hope, I think. And yeah, I want to I don't know, it's hard, don't want to leave it without speaking to what Michael was saying. It's obvious that this pond went in with financial support, and we're really privileged and happy to get that funding. But it can be really a challenge to implement these permaculture projects. Certainly at scale, we need to be doing this work in every single sub-basin of the world, and yet in my personal work, I'm working as a contractor. I'm doing planning and design and installation work for the most part for people who can afford it, and that's it's still really working within the system. And what we need to do, I think, is something that we have in permaculture and in our permaculture community is we have a sense of kind of higher goal and ethical purpose. And that's something that we have strength in together. We're not just a bunch of independent private contractors working, just for the sake of capital. We're trying to take every single angle we can in order to restore the world. And that's what makes us unique. And I think what PINA helps with is to conceive of ourselves as a community that's kind of mutual aid, supporting ourselves, getting this work done, and getting that work done in a way that is not just regenerative to the land, but regenerative to ourselves, to our own home economies, and that is what we need to be working out. I think that it goes to just where are the leverage points for myself. For what it's worth, what I have done for my own work in order to be semi-successful in this is to I have found that here in the Northwest there's a lot of funds through the Natural Resource Conservation Service and also the Department of Forestry to do planning and design work for larger scale farm and forests. And I spoke with this state forester, and I pitched the idea of doing these plans, and he said, well, send me your first draft and we'll see how it goes, and we'll see if we'll get you on the roster as a consulting forester. And I was able to do that after spending a good 10 years apprenticing with Approvecho's former forester, and now I'm finding pretty good success taking funds that are available through state dollars for our planning work to carry out at least the planning phase and finance the planning phase of larger scale permaculture projects. The NRCS and the Department of Forestry pay about 75% cost share on doing really holistic forest plans. And those plans then can be leveraged to get other restoration dollars through the Natural Resource Conservation Service or the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board or other watershed councils to implement restoration work that's prescribed in the plans. So this is just a little brief narrative about like finding those leverage points to get the work done a little bit outside the box and opening up new niches. But you know, I still spend a lot of my time just doing contract installations for people as well in order to pay the bills. And then so you know, I don't know if that helps, but it's just a personal narrative on how it's kind of like this slow. For me, it's been a very slow process of carving out that space, and I definitely want to acknowledge that it's very much because of my privilege, my personal ability to have, you know, not a really strong. I've had a fairly good burn rate financially for my work, and then but also, you know, I was able to move to Appalachia when it was when there was an opening, and Dow and I spent about 10 years just really focused in on that project, building our skills and keeping our cost of living down to about $150, you know, a month. So that's kind of, and then working off site in order to keep that project. So I don't want this to come off as kind of like, oh, well, you know, trying to say this is like a success story, but just that it's just to kind of say that it is very hard to make it work. We need more mutual aid to make it work, and as we try to make it work, we need to be trying to think about where are the particular unique leverage points. So I hope that, you know, just to honor and respond to some of my thoughts from what you bring up, Michael.
And I just want to make it clear. I know that I get excited sometimes and my tone sounds like that I'm frustrated, but that wasn't what I was. I want to make this clear. I'm looking for solutions, and that's all I'm concerned about. I'm not complaining. I know what's going on. I know that I don't get the same place at the table as everybody else. I don't care about that. What I care about is the solution. And I think that PINA is, as a, representing this stuff, which I get behind. I'm transparent with how I tell it. People know I call it colonialist permaculture. Mm-hmm. I explain exactly to everybody why I call it that. I hope nobody has a problem that I only focus on native species, because I know that they are suffering. It's not a judgment. It is just what I choose to do. And it's not, if a client, look, this client wants this, guess what? That's what they get. You know, it's not I'm happy to do things in a good way. I just want to get paid for them. And I think that's the solution we should be focusing on, is how do we get money in the hands of people who are doing the types of works. You know, there's that guy in India, he planted an entire island, 300,000 trees by himself. There's like a couple in Brazil that did 2 million trees by themselves. You know, that's the kind of permaculture I want to see and be a part of. And I don't need a lot of money to do it. I just need some money so that I can, you know, afford a place to lay my head, which I can't. You know, it's very bizarre. That's all I was trying to get to, is like, are we going to work on these solutions? Are we going to start piecing this pie together so that it makes better sense for everybody? Because I love the ethos, but I can tell you, just like you all know, that Venn diagram is not fair. It's not equal. It's not reflective of what it's supposed to be for all of us. The biodiversity isn't here at this conference. It's not reflective of what it should be. We need to do by whatever means necessary to right these relationships. And having courageous conversations. I take people all the time. I came from very violent circumstance. If the worst violence you have to put up from me is the tone of my voice, you need to work on your fragility, not on worrying about the tone of my voice. Like, it's like, we got some serious work to do. We need to have these courageous conversations, and we need to right this thing, because we're in bad shape. I can't see Denver from my window, and it's one of the most beautiful things that I enjoy waking up to every morning. And there is so much smoke out there, I can't see Denver. And people are just driving around like it's normal. You know, it's like, no, we got to do something. It's bad out there.
Absolutely agreed.
Thanks
So
so much.
15 minutes, everybody. I'm going to mute everybody until we come back. And thank you so much, Mitchell. That was a beautiful film.
Great, thanks so much. And just as a closing note, just want to say, you know, hopefully, you know, tying in what Michael said there, this project is proof that a small amount of money can have a huge impact. So hopefully we can leverage these types of projects as examples to further all of the projects that we're working on. So thanks so much to PINA for supporting this and everyone involved, and for you all taking the time to hear about this and share your thoughts. Look forward to staying connected.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great.
Thank
Beautiful.
you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Say hi to Dow for me, Abel.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Here she is. She's here.
Oh, hey.
I just came in the room. Hi, good to